left, right.
So, America sounds like a pretty expensive place to live, yeah? Well, in this episode, we break down what is contributing to the cost of living here, why it's so difficult and becoming increasingly difficult to afford just everyday life. Imagine the 1950s and 60s, you could work in a shoe store and be able to provide for a family as the only working member of the family, have a two-car garage, white picket fence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you work at a shoe store now, you're not able to put food on your own table. So times have changed. Enjoy the episode. I'll see you on the other end. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Press this button.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right, looks like we are live. This is SipTalk, episode 205. My name is Justin DiGiulio, out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Boswell, Philosopher, retired professional referee, bartender, and most exciting of all, accountant. And we are also joined by Kevin, by title, resident hippie liberal douche,
Yeah, the resident hippie liberal douche.
who's ready to contribute. So here we are. We were just talking about what we were drinking before we went on air. James, you said you're drinking
Bush Ice.
Bush Ice. Kevin, you said you just went to
I
the
got-
liquor store.
Yeah, I've got Knob Creek.
Okay. Now, James is in sunny South Carolina. Without the sun, it's nighttime. Kevin, are you also in South Carolina?
No, I'm in upstate New York.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, Knob Creek has always been something to me that makes me think of kind of like sitting by the fireplace, trying to stay warm. I like a little Knob Creek. I've got one of my winter favorites here is a Hendrick's gin. I just stepped in. I realized I didn't have a glass down here. Stepped into the boiler room to get some leftover glassware, and I just blew into the cup, and all this dust just came out. So I can't see straight. The cup's probably really dirty. But let's let this
The gin will
episode
kill
commence.
that.
What's that?
The gin will kill that.
Yeah, the gin should if I rub it on my eyeballs. Today, we are talking, this is episode 4 in a series of How to Fix America. And today we are talking about affording America.
4 of many, because there's lots of problems here.
There's lots of problems. And we were talking beforehand that we might not have enough content to sustain the entire hour-long episode. I actually think just the different perspectives that we have on this and kind of tearing down as to why it's not affordable anymore. You know, if you're talking 50 years ago, you could work in a shoe shop, have a four bedroom home, 2-car garage, 2 kids, and a spouse that didn't work. Right?
Yeah, like even if you think about like Married with Children, where like the dude had a decent suburban house, a wife who didn't work, like 2 cars, worked 1 job, and at the time when you watched that show, like there might have been other unrealistic things that happened in the show, but everyone's like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Like he can afford that.
He did work in a shoe shop, and but I mean it was TV. But I think the
but like
reality is that
when
you didn't.
Friends was on, and you had these people in this huge apartment in New York City. Everyone's like, that's bullshit. That nobody can do that.
But 40, 50, 60 years ago and further, but well before that, when it came to the United States, you didn't need to be an engineer or a high-end professional in any different industry to be able to afford a fucking house and a car and food and health insurance, right? Nowadays, unless you have, I mean, I'm looking at the cost of living and the median income in different states, different cities across the country. Like you're not buying a house if the average cost of a house is $500,000 and the average income is $61,000 in that state. how's that working out?
$61,000 of income is not qualifying for a mortgage on a $500,000 house.
Not
even
with,
close.
Not with 6.5%, 7% interest rates.
Not even at like 2% interest rates.
Yeah.
There's no way. So I think that's kind of the reality, the current setting that we have right now. I have a lot of friends in New York City that all rent. I remember, 8-10 years ago when people would come to my apartment and be astonished that I lived alone, just being blown. What do you mean you don't have roommates? And there are people in New York City that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that live with roommates because that's the lifestyle there. The majority, roughly 70% of residents in New York City, rent apartments. They don't own the condo or co-op. And buying something is prohibitively expensive in New York City. So there's that aspect of it, people living with roommates, which you wouldn't expect to be doing at 45, 50 years old. Or, if you're 17, 18 years old, think about what your life is going to look like in your mid and later 20s. Do you think do you imagine yourself being 28 years old, living with four dudes?
Well, I have 2 roommates, but I also it's a house. Like I wouldn't want to be in an apartment with more than one roommate. And in New York City, having 2 or 3 or 4 roommates is pretty common.
Well, you're in a good place now as a single, but whatever your situation is, household income wise, you can have a good setup where you have a big house and you can house hack and have some roommates. You familiar with the term house hacking?
Mm-mm.
House hacking is you go and you do a down payment, you get a mortgage, and then you get some roommates to live in the house, and they basically pay your bills. That's tougher to do when you have a family and stuff, but you're in a good enough position that you actually could afford to buy the house.
Well, and you could have the family help to pay the bills.
Well, but again, that's how many people in your family are working, and then what's the cost of living? So let me
start a Chinese restaurant. Then they can start as young as 5.
Yep.
So I'm curious, guys. What do you think is the biggest factor in the unaffordability of the United States? We'll lead
probably housing, which we've talked about, and I looked this up. So if you look at average rent per year, so since 1980, rent prices have increased an average of 8.85% per year, which way outpaces wage inflation over the same period of time.
Yeah, you think inflation in general, most people think, 2 to 3%, not, the past year or two, obviously, right? But in general, you're looking at 2 to 3% in a normal year, we'll call it. And so, yeah, if you're averaging 8%, that means that just housing's getting more and more expensive. Certainly going to outgrow any potential raise you could get.
Wage inflation is probably somewhere between like 2 and 5% over the same period of time. All right, here we go. Rent prices increase 1.94% faster than wages, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have 40 years to accrue that, like that 2% starts to really add up.
Especially when that's your biggest, factor typically in terms of monthly bills.
Well, the thing is, the fact that we're talking on a 40-year scale seems obscene to me. However, the fact that it has gone unchecked, I'll bet you it's a year-over-year increase without slowing down at all over 40 years, which is
the vast, I'm looking at these and it's most of it's every 10 years, but sometimes it's like every 5 years. And the vast majority of them are positive. There's like one little blip where it's negative.
And
but
this is what? This was housing costs?
Rent.
Oh, this is rent. Okay.
So in the last 3 years, it's been like almost dead on 9% if you average them out.
So I have some interesting rent numbers, and I just pulled them, I think, from the U.S. Census Bureau, but I want to give you some overall rent prices. So, and I picked some diverse states, but New York, I think in itself is diverse because you have upstate New York and then you have New York City. New York median rent $24.74
for the state.
For the state, Florida
okay.
$22.09. New Jersey, $28.22. These are rent prices. South Carolina, $14.43. Texas 1483, South Dakota 1130, California 3032. So California is leading of the states that I pulled. Overall median rent in the U.S. $1,983. So
Yeah, it's expensive, and like the problem that I really want to just focus on is rent is going up faster than wages are. So you're going if you let this experiment run endlessly, you're eventually going to get to the point where nobody can afford rent.
but that's what I'm saying. 40 years sounds like an obscene scale to be measuring this on. But the fact that it just has gone up year after year after year unchecked, and nothing has changed in 40 years. What do things look like in another?
Well, things have changed over the past 40 years. It's not like that continued growth in how much it costs to rent has gone for no reason at all.
Well, I think a lot of the issue with the rent prices, though, what I see in New York City is that we have these big conglomerate behemoth companies that are buying rental buildings, and we have a lot less affordability of the general real estate for the smaller players to get involved. And the bigger players just have a lot more. What's the word I'm looking for?
It's a monopoly.
Yeah, but they can monopolize and influence rent prices. What were you going to say, James?
Two things. One, we were kind of talking about this before we went live, where Kevin was talking about how, like, with inflation and everything, it's had the effect with inflation and income inequality. It's had the effect of coalescing into a smaller and smaller pool of people. And what I was going to say is that's kind of the natural course of unchecked capitalism, is that like small advantages multiply over time, and you can just continue to use the money that you had to make even more money. And it's really difficult to fight that without having some kind of anti-capitalist measures put into place.
Well, higher tax rates.
That's one, yes, for sure.
And that's not that's socialist.
Right. Anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. I mean, it's not necessarily one or the other. It may just 100% tax rate on profits effectively would be socialist, but
No.
increasing the tax rates would not be socialist. Would it be closer to that realm? Yeah.
Well, it's all of this is on a continuum where you have no taxation and no government, and you have like anarcho-capitalism where everything has a price, and like any service you want can be bought, but nothing's provided for you. And then on the other extreme would be like pure communism where everything is provided for you and you have no choice in anything. And socialism, if we were to go like 0 is anarcho-capitalism and 100 is pure communism, socialism probably lives in like the 40 to 80 range.
Well,
depending on how extreme you're taking that socialism.
I don't necessarily think it would be a linear scale. Okay, because as you get more, I mean, either way, that's not the scenario that we're in. Limiting capitalism, I think, is something that is going to help solve this problem. But I don't think getting in the realm of socialism is where we need to be.
Well, it is like anytime you're doing something like this, you are in the realm of socialism. Well, and what we need to stop, we need to destigmatize the word socialism, because
let me give you an example, though. Rather than taxing the businesses, okay, and then giving people more free services, right? We're gonna tax the tire shop on their profits, and then we're gonna reduce the cost of tires. I don't think that's going in the realm of socialism. I think maybe creating jobs for tire manufacturing here may be a better idea, right? Bringing those jobs here, sourcing the resources and the material here and the labor here. And I don't think that's necessarily in the realm of socialism. Do you follow me?
But it
Whereas
is.
if we tax the tires and then give people tire credits, that's more socialist, right? But if we tax the tires a little bit more, that's more anti-capitalism. But and then I suppose so is telling people that the jobs need to be in the U.S. and we need to be sourcing material
Right.
from.
Any interference in the free market is going to be, by definition, socialist in nature.
In what way? I don't think capitalism and socialism are exact opposites here.
I think you're confusing socialism with the authoritarian governments that are frequently the boogeymen of socialism.
Well, I'm thinking
Right.
I'm talking about socialism as an economic policy, not as a political discussion.
I'm thinking more like Denmark and Sweden.
Right.
You know,
which
we
are,
have very high taxes, very much more on the socialist.
right. And they if I were to have to score them, I'd put them at probably a 65 or a 70 in terms of socialism.
But their countries are very much so based on that, whereas our country is based on, at this point in time, the right to bear arms and ban abortions. So
We're
like-
I'd rate our country at a 30 or a 35.
I just don't think that we're going to turn the U.S. into a giant Sweden anytime ever. And
No, but you can look at some of the policies that the Nordic countries have, and you can look and see that they're objectively successful.
I want to give a quick shout out on TikTok to Saliha Ozdeel, who just became our top viewer. I guess she's watched us the longest. We have MJ1226, Santos Day, and Bible Worshipper, which says, "This is my last night on earth before God welcomes me to heaven. I can't wait by." So just the last 2 minutes, I saw a bunch of comments come through, and we got a few people on Instagram too. Say hi to these guys. I see Irma, Layla, Jorge, Lalisa. What's going on, guys? So, can I throw out some numbers for median household income?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Just to contrast with the monthly rent costs. So I'm going to give you the same states because I feel like New York, New Jersey, Florida, South Carolina, North Dakota, and California are just pretty good states.
Yeah, we're hitting kind of the corners of the
I don't know.
country.
New Jersey, that's not really the greatest state. I mean,
Nope.
have you ever been to Jersey?
He lives in Jersey.
I think you'd be surprised. And
Point take.
that's coming from a former New Yorker. So average household income, New York, and this is 2021 because we're still in 2022. Average household income 75,000, Florida 61,000, New Jersey 89,000, South Carolina 58,000, Texas 67,000, South Dakota 63,000, California 84,000, and the overall average income for the U.S. $69,021.
So what's interesting is when you look, you can see that while there's definitely variance between those states in terms of the income, the variance in income is much less than the variance in rent.
Yeah, very much so. But those aren't big jumps in income either.
I wonder what those numbers were 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, because I'm sure part of it is, once COVID hit, people were allowed to work remotely. And so I know there were a lot of, white collar workers who all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't have to live in, midtown, downtown Manhattan. I can, go buy a farm in South Dakota while still making my Manhattan income. Yeah, let's do it. I'm sure that there's, cases like that skewed the numbers, a little bit.
think there's probably fewer cases of that, but I'll bet there are some. I did move out of the city, but not because I was working remotely. I still commute every day. I have a very long commute, but I didn't want to be in the city, especially after just dealing with the way they govern the city through coronavirus.
Well, it's highly regional because I know one of my friends that lived in Oakland um, talked about how so many people she knew that lived in San Francisco were moving to like Tahoe instead. And so Tahoe for about a year or so was one of the hottest real estate markets because you had all these people that worked in the tech industry in San Francisco making good incomes but also paying out the ass for everything cuz San Francisco is expensive. And as soon as they were like could cut ties with the geographic location of San Francisco, like they looked at some places that were nice that were nearby, and Tahoe like fit all of the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where like there were people like who had homes in Tahoe that said several times a day or several times a week, like random people would just be knocking on their door saying, I'll give you $3 million cash for your house tomorrow. Like the place wasn't listed for sale. There was no signs out front, no real estate agent, no nothing. Just people would be walking up to people that owned homes in Tahoe and saying, "I'll give you whatever you want for this house," because they're probably making $500,000 or $600,000 a year in the tech industry, and they could afford to make that kind of a purchase.
It happened, yeah, it happened in New York as well. I lived closer to Manhattan as of a couple years ago. I was looking to buy a house, in Lower Hudson Valley. And so about a year before I ended up buying my current house, I was like, okay, let's just have a look at what the market says so I have an idea of, what I need to save up and confirm that I'm, on track for that. And then COVID hit and people from Manhattan started moving out into, the suburbs. And literally the same homes that were for sale at one price, they went up by 30% over the course of the year. And if anything, they actually went down in quality. They went from, one price, affordable, ready to move in, don't require any work other than, maybe, you want to paint a room a certain color, fine, but it's a good house to move into, to, okay, here's a train wreck, and you're going to have to put in another $250,000 just to bring it up to code.
No, I mean we're seeing the same thing in Jersey, and it's a similar market out here because of our proximity to Manhattan, and houses were selling for well over reasonable value. We bought relatively early in the pandemic and had difficulty with appraisal because a lot of the comps just weren't there in the historical data, right? And
The comps just couldn't keep up with the market.
well, if you go back a year in the comps, places were 40% less, right?
Yeah.
So and trying to find places that had as much land as we have here, it was really tough. So we struggled with that. We had to actually put down a much bigger down payment because of the appraisal, just to save the house, and it was almost impossible to buy a house during that time. But Kevin, to what you said, yeah, people had to actually sell their houses, meaning they had to be proactive with actually trying to sell the house. Now people didn't have to repair that hole in the wall or patch the pothole in the driveway or paint, put a fresh coat of paint on the house, or host open houses where they baked cookies and lit candles. They just had to put it on the market, and they had offers coming out of their ass. So, but I think what we're going to see now, and this is why it's an interesting spin on the cost of living and affordability of the United States, affordability in the U.S., is that with this recent sharp rise in mortgage rates, in interest rates, mortgages are much more expensive. And the number of home sales has plummeted very quickly because, we're talking about adding a lot more of a monthly spend onto people's bills than they were prepared for.
Well, the number of home sales plummeting is also highly regional, where if you look at home sales across the nation, it's actually somewhat flat if you take out a couple key markets. So, and those are the markets that were the hottest prior to the mortgage rates going way up. So like a city like San Diego, it has seen like a huge drop in home sales recently. But if you take out like the hot markets like San Diego, Miami, Phoenix, Tampa, and think those are like the four that came up in my reports all the time. Then home sales are relatively flat. And the thing is, we've talked about this on the cast before with these large corporations buying up single family houses to rent out. And they pay cash. So they don't
Of course they
care
do. Of
what
course they do.
mortgage rates are because they're not paying mortgages. So they can still afford to buy these homes. And that's what you're competing against as a single person trying to buy a house is.
Well, that's what happened with Zillow. Is they were buying all the homes in certain neighborhoods, and then by the time they would buy the last home, the price would be up, and then that would help them increase the property value.
Well, they were kind of running a pump and dump almost.
Yeah. But the last property they would buy would be at a higher price, which would then inflate the price of all the properties that they had formerly bought.
They ended up getting kind of bitten in the ass by that practice, though.
Not enough. I mean, they stopped doing it, and that's basically. I don't think they had to pay anything out.
No, they didn't.
Right.
They didn't get in any trouble, but it was a strategy that worked short term, but people eventually caught on to it. But you've got firms. The thing is, Zillow was doing it because Zillow was looking to basically flip the homes. They were just looking to buy it and then buy up a lot of surrounding homes around there, pump up the kind of neighborhood's value, and then exit the market all at once. Whereas you've got firms like BlackRock, which aren't interested in doing these quick sales and these quick turnarounds. They're happy to own these homes and rent them out.
Just for anybody that's joining us now, if you're watching on Instagram or TikTok, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can also watch on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch, and you'll be able to make comments that we can read real time. So if you want to comment while you're watching this, comment on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch. We can see what you're saying. We'd love to have you guys join, but don't forget also to subscribe to SipTalk podcast. So let
me just finish up that thought.
Go ahead.
Because
I didn't realize
what Zillow was doing is with the quick turnaround thing. That was kind of pushing people out of the market, but those homes were coming back onto the market pretty quickly. And because Zillow didn't really execute this strategy very well, they lost money on a lot of homes. And so if you were just patient and knew what you were doing, you could probably still get yourself a decent deal that way. What BlackRock is doing is they're taking supply out, and that supply is not coming back.
No, because they're converting them into rental properties.
And there's just a big difference because all the prices go up when you reduce supply.
That's where I want to go in this conversation is some other contributing costs to daily life. So, and I'll just give you one example. It's not a good example, but if you wanted to use Microsoft Word 10 years ago, you went and you spent $50 or $100 on Microsoft Word. Now you got to pay $19 a month as a subscription fee, right? So when you're talking about, you used to own a home, and now these big corporations are coming in, buying them and renting them out. People are losing the ownership aspect of homes, but that's happening on literally everything else. So I gave you an example of Microsoft Word, but that also goes, we talked about in the car episode, the future of vehicles, how all the future vehicles are going to be controlled electronically. So to unlock features, you'll have to pay a monthly subscription fee. So
we're already seeing that. The latest one I saw is that there's an electric car that Mercedes is making where you can pay an extra monthly subscription for more acceleration. So the electric motors in the car have the capability of, let's just say, 500 horsepower.
Yeah.
But you can only get the 500 horsepower if you pay a subscription for it. Otherwise, it's 300 horsepower. I'm making up the numbers, but just to illustrate the point.
But
Tesla's doing the similar thing with the range of their batteries, right? So the original owner buys the battery, with so that it can charge to 280 miles or whatever the max range of their battery is, right? They go ahead and they sell it, and the new owner, once they take it into a Tesla shop for whatever normal maintenance, they will reset the battery so that will only charge 240 miles.
And you have to pay money to get it back.
You have to pay to get that 280 back.
Whenever you buy a car, you want to take it in for a tune-up, right? That's your tune-up cost. But I think we're seeing
Well,
Yeah, but the thing is, the tune-up's an actual mechanical procedure that you need to do on a car,
yeah.
whereas this is just like unclicking a box in the software.
Well, but just think that the mechanic shops are going to make a lot less money because there's a lot fewer moving parts, a lot less complexity with these electrical vehicles, a lot less mechanical complexity, I should say.
They'll change slash evolve. It's not that they won't make any more money. It's that they'll have to realize that, okay, we're no longer just strictly mechanical. We'll have to get someone that's, basically a computer tech in.
Well, that's it won't happen like that, because like all of these companies have their own proprietary software that they won't allow outside of the dealership. So if you're an independent mechanic shop, even if you've got someone with a computer science background, and like you're not going to be able to get the software to interface with like the firmware that's on the car.
You are vastly over valuing the quality of the software on these cars. Like there's been a mod market for, I know, Teslas, and there has been for quite some time, where people will say, hey, yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll unlock that 280-mile battery for you, because they know how to get in and fix it. They're not an authorized Tesla retailer or anything. It's entirely black market, but they offer their services that way. It's not like it's
You're probably also voiding any and all warranties on the car when you do that, though.
Well, possibly. So what are some other things, though, outside of vehicles that are becoming subscription or rental based? Because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine right before we jumped on air, and we were talking about how, well, actually, we were talking about mechanic shops, and I was saying back in the day, you used to be able to go to a Valvoline or a Jiffy Lube or something and just roll up and get an oil change in a half hour to an hour. But back then, people used to get oil changes every 3,000 miles much more frequently. Now people are getting their oil changed every 10,000 miles as required by the manufacturer. But what I found, I called 9 different shops to just get a balance and alignment a few weeks ago. And finally I was able, and they were booked for the following week. Finally, I was able to get it done somewhere. And when I went in to pick up the car, I was like, hey man, like, what's the deal? Why can nobody, it's a simple, it takes less than an hour. It's very simple. It's just pure labor. There's no parts involved. You're not buying any.
Put it up on the alignment rack, have the lasers do their thing.
Yeah, it's not like I go in and they give me a $50 part, right? And he said, we don't have anybody that works here. I have one tech on. I can't find anybody else to work here. So, there is that aspect of things too.
Well, let me pivot a little bit, because I want to talk about minimum wage, which, like, mechanic shops aren't paying minimum wage, but I do want to talk about wage growth, or more aptly, wage stagnation. And so, like, I think if you as a business are having trouble finding employees, I think in the vast majority of cases, the reason for that is you're not paying enough.
But I think that increasing wages for a mechanic shop like that, for example, would put them out of business. I can't imagine they make that much money month over month, week over week, that they're that vastly profitable. I think, and again, this is I know that you guys are both much more liberal than I am, and you really want to circle back to wages, but I think that is, I think that's just kind of like a quick service level fix. I think really it has to do with cost of goods and manufacturing, and you could say cost of rent. We can include cost of rent, because a business renting a retail space or a strip mall or warehouse space, that rent price is way too expensive. I could tell you my rent for the office in monthly overhead was intimidating. What we were paying every month in rent was intimidating. And, if I look at opening another office again, like, that's my big concern, is the rent cost. And the cost of everything is just absolutely insane. So not just the cost of wages, but rent and wages will put you out of business. And the way that these big corporations and the landlords work is they squeeze you for every penny of your profit they can on rent. Kevin, what were you going to say?
I've already blanked on what I was going to.
I'll give you another example as someone who in the last decade started a business, grew it very quickly. Every time I had a spare money, I hired somebody. Every time I had an extra 30 grand in revenue, I hired somebody and paid them 60 grand because I figured that by the time, even though I couldn't afford their 60 grand with that 30 grand, implementing that position, because it was a new position, would help me make up the difference. And it did, year over year, hire after hire. But that's how I ran my business, which is why it became really difficult during the coronavirus pandemic period, because we were already operating, using all of our revenue towards expanding the business, paying wages and covering expenses.
Right. So I just remembered what my question was going to actually be. Going back to those numbers about income that you had mentioned earlier, where were they roughly? Like median income across the states?
I think it was for the U.S. was 69,000.
Okay.
That's family income.
Yes. So that's family income, and that means that literally half the country is making less than 69,000. Right. That's what median income.
That would
Yes.
be median.
Right. So there was a business owner out of Seattle. This was probably 7 years ago or so, maybe a little more, who he had done some research on, at what point in people's incomes do they stop, do you start getting diminishing gains in terms of how happy they are with their workplace?
Yeah.
And at the time he had figured out that once you're making $75,000 a year, if you're happy with your job, you're going to be happy. And giving you, everyone likes a raise after that point, but it doesn't mean nearly as much as if you're making $50,000 a year and you get a 10% raise, right? It goes a lot farther.
That line is the struggle line where you wake up and you're just like, fuck, am I going to be able to afford this? Or my
exactly.
The upcoming mortgage bill is adding stress and stress hormones and cortisol to my daily life. It's miserable because I'm stressing about the cost of living. That $75,000 meant that you didn't have to stress about those expenses, and at $75,000, you were happy. Now, if you made $95,000, you weren't that much happier, right?
Right.
I think it's like two lines. There's the struggle line, and then there's a comfort line. And I think the 75,000 would be the comfort line.
I think it would be. I think it would be the struggle line, and I think the struggle line and the comfort line are effectively very close. Like, what's really the difference there? Because
that's also going to depend on the person. But my point remains. My point remains. If half the country is making less than that, whether it's a comfort line or a struggle line, if half the country is making less than that, well, then clearly wages are too low.
So I want to make
no, you can't draw a conclusion.
All right, I'm going to mute both of you guys just to make my point here. Where that struggle line and where that comfort line, what's the difference? I don't think what I'm saying is there's not, James, just on your point, I don't think there's that much difference, because at the struggle line, when you surpass that struggle line, that means you're not driving a car that breaks down every 2 months, right? So you're driving a newer car. Now that might be a 3 or 4 year old Nissan Altima, versus that comfort line might be driving a brand new car, right? I don't think there's that much difference between driving a 4-year-old Nissan and a 2022 Toyota, right? Whether you have a 42-inch TV or a 55-inch TV, I think that's really the difference between struggle and comfort. And I don't think there's that much difference there. But to Kevin's point, is getting people up to that $75,000 mark shouldn't be that difficult.
I'm not saying it's not difficult. I'm saying that if half the people are below that line, then it's indicative of a problem. That's all I meant to say.
Well,
Well, it's not even that. It's like that $69,000 income. That's for like a family of 4. So that means that the average person is probably making more like 35,000.
Right.
So how do we bring that lower class up? Where does that money come from? So I think really where that money comes from in today's society are the middle class people, right? And the smaller business owners. Whereas where we'd like it to be coming from are the very top 1, 2, and 3% that are making that much more money than God himself.
Well,
I don't think the middle class has enough money, like literally, to spread that income across
But
the bottom.
I think they're being milked. They're being milked for it. And just to support the jobs, we have to have. I think the industries that we have in the United States. I'm sorry, I don't. I think making $17 an hour to work at McDonald's is a bit excessive. Okay. Now, if we had other industries in the United States that we've exported the majority of our jobs to other countries, right? And if anything, that in some of those countries, the workers may not be paid that much less. It's just that we get tax breaks from those countries to have the jobs there, which is wild, right? And then the U.S., for whatever reason, isn't putting tariffs on the cost of goods imported back into the U.S. from the U.S. companies. I don't know exactly how that breaks down, but to me, $17 an hour to work at McDonald's is silly. But if that's the only option, that's
why?
Really
Why
bad.
is that silly?
Well, because I think we have to. I don't think that a 35-year-old person who's trying to support a family should be working at McDonald's.
But what if you don't have any other options?
What I'm saying is we need to create more options by having more industry and more jobs in the United States rather than allowing our big companies and corporations to export these jobs. And, look at where we stand with China right now, who, if I buy pretty much anything online, it is coming from somewhere in China right now. There's a very high probability of that.
So I'm looking this up right now.
So for those of you who aren't watching the video feed, who are listening to us, James' face just started glowing white.
Which means I'm doing research.
Now he's Googling something for us.
So while James looks that thing up, all right, so you don't, with the comment about someone making, $17 an hour for McDonald's or whatever, right? And it's not worth it. So you work in Manhattan, right? You run a business. Well, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you make tons of money because you're clearly a very successful looking guy, right? Let's just say that you make $1,000.
I'm glad I looked that way.
You're clearly making like $1,000 an hour, right? We'll assume for the sake of this example that you're making $1,000 an hour. Internally, you can go ahead and take whatever your actual pay is and substitute that in, right?
So you've chosen me as an adversary for your example, but go ahead.
Well, I think James agrees with me. I mean, maybe not to the extent that I'm going. I am the hippie liberal douche, but
I don't know where you're going with this. But
all right, well, so
I want to. When you're done, I've got some stats.
All right, so you're making it that.
I want to hear Kevin out here. I want to hear your stats. I want to say hi to Marmar on TikTok, and I'm going to get to her. I'm going to get to her question in just a second.
All right,
Kevin. So where are you going with this?
So you're making
like me, who works in Manhattan, who you believe, from your perspective, makes money hand over fist. Okay.
Right. Some person comes up to you randomly and says, "Hey, I desperately need someone to work at McDonald's for the day. Could you do this for me?" Would you say yes if it was for that same $1,000 an hour?
No, probably not.
Why? I'm curious, like, we'll assume that your work is covered. Like, you don't have to worry about that, right?
Okay, yeah. I don't think it's a very good job. I don't want to make
okay, but
French fries all day. Now, if I worked in some other industry which didn't involve making French fries and selling burgers for $1.
Okay, Walmart worker then. Like Walmart cashier. Like someone says, "Hey, I'll pay you $1,000 an hour to be a Walmart cashier for the day."
I could do that. Yeah.
Okay. Then they say, "Okay, I'll do this to you for $15 an hour."
But the issue is that Walmart worker couldn't turn around and then do my job.
So wait.
So the issue is that the Walmart worker effectively should be paid less because it's a less complex job.
I get where you're coming from. My point is
there is higher replaceability when it comes to that employee. So now you actually do it for $15 an hour.
What you're both restating is Marx's theory on wages.
Well, so the point that I was trying to get to, and again, I'm sure you'll both disagree with me to a certain extent on this, is you place value not just on your skill set, but also on your time. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm the same way. So shouldn't that be the same way for the McDonald's worker? And okay, you could say that their skill level is a zero, which I disagree with because there is you have to at the very least be able to work with be with coworkers, not
But you can do
multitask.
Multitask, deal with really crappy customers.
You got to listen to me. You could do it at 16 years old.
Okay. Right.
Look, I want to steer back because I want to steer away from this for a second because when you were talking about like the outsourcing of jobs and how if we were to bring back industrial and manufacturing jobs to this country, that would fix a lot of our problems. Here's the reason why that's not going to happen.
Well, I could tell you many reasons why that's not going to happen.
Well, here's an easy one because like the average factory worker in China makes about 56,000 Chinese yuan. If you translate that to US dollars, that's about $8,000 a year.
But what is that in with regards to China's economy? I think that's the other thing that's important. Like that,
I don't care about that.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for James.
Okay.
People, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I know where you're going with this.
If I'm a U.S. company and a skilled manufacturing job in the United States is going to cost me $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 per year per worker, and I can get that same worker in China for $8,000 a year, even after tariffs, even after shipping, even after all the international mumbo jumbo that's going to be introduced to this, I am coming out way ahead on my cost of manufacturing.
James, what you were saying is that's why an iPhone costs $1,100 and not $20,000. Okay, but right because we're we make iPhones affordable in the United States because we make the phones in China. Now the sad reality is that Americans couldn't afford the iPhone if it was made in the United States. And Chinese currently can't afford an iPhone, and the iPhone is made in China. So that's why. So I don't think increasing the wages here is just a simple solution. I think that's why we've gotten ourselves into a really mess of a situation internationally.
Well, you know what the solution is?
I don't think the solution is very simple, but I'm curious what you want to propose right now.
I don't really care about the outsourcing of jobs. I really don't, because that's a problem that you can't fix. Because if you have labor that is 3 to 10 times cheaper somewhere else, you're going to go with it. So the jobs that we have in the United States exist, and you're not really going to change the labor market too much. What we have a problem with is this kind of coagulation of money, where you have people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and a number of others that have more money than they can possibly spend. For example, Elon Musk spent $44 billion on a company, and if he loses every penny of that, which he might,
it's very possible.
It will not have any effect whatsoever on the lifestyle he wants to live. The only effect it will have on him is just increased public ridicule. But in terms of him being able to do anything he wants, losing $44 billion will have zero effect on him. And the issue, I have with people having that much money is that's capital that's not being allocated. That's money that could be going to help other people and isn't, because the next $50,000 that go to Elon Musk, he would blink and he wouldn't even know it. And if I like the idea that, now this is a bit extreme and I'm not advocating for it 100% as public policy, but I like the idea of once your net worth is $1 billion or more, you get a trophy that says you won capitalism. And your tax rate is 100% until your net worth drops below $1 billion. And anytime you complain about having to get taxed, you can just look at that trophy and be like, oh yeah, that's right, I won.
Well, I think there should be something along those lines. Okay, I think 100% tax rate.
I'm exaggerating my
I know
point
you're
a little bit.
but that's why it's difficult for you, especially as a liberal person, and same for you, Kevin, to get people on board with these ideas. Is that they're very off-putting, with your delivery.
Well, no,
I'm exaggering my point for a fact.
I know, but
and also
public policy proposal.
we all exaggerate and use hyperbole when we have good, solid points, and that's the issue with the discourse, is that people get so turned off.
No, I don't even think it's that. So when you're looking at economic policy, the biggest issue is that there are plenty of people that are making, below the median wage, right? So they're making below 69,000, and with regards to that median wage, nice. They're making below that, but they think that one day they're going to be in that top 1% or top 1% of 1%, and they don't want to potentially screw themselves out of that. Yeah, and the fact is, the odds of them reaching that level of wealth are so ridiculously low that
they might as well be buying lottery tickets.
Well, I think
exactly.
Right now you're speaking for 50% of every Southern Republican state. So,
yeah.
who a lot of these guys live below the lines we're talking about. Guys,
yeah, you've got people that are making $40,000 a year voting against higher taxes on the people that are making $1 million plus.
So I want to take a little pause. I want to address some comments that we got online, and I got to ask you guys. I'm drinking at this point in time about half a liter of this. I looked at it a little while ago, and I realized I was about.
I've been watching your pores.
I realized I was about the halfway mark in the bottle, and I was like, "Oh, that's not that bad. It's just a little bottle." I looked at the label; it said a liter. And now I haven't seen you guys take a single sip of anything.
I'm halfway through my beer.
You're halfway through one beer with a 6% alcohol rate. And Kevin, we can't see your video for whatever reason. I can get on camera here. I just assume.
Well, my bottle is pretty much empty. I'll tell you that much. It looks like I've got maybe one small pour left. So I'll give you that much.
I didn't see what you started with, but I hope you finish that bottle. I want to talk on TikTok right now. 2 questions. First question I'll answer because it's directed towards me. The other one is about McDonald's. But Marmar says, why did you stop making TikTok videos? And Kevin, you may not know this. James, I know you're not on TikTok. I was doing regular daily kind of motivational or funny type TikTok videos. And what would happen is I'd get a lot of comments on them, and I couldn't keep up with replying to all these comments. And I just felt bad. So I just really stopped making them because it became too much. And for me, it was just, if you look at the last half dozen to a dozen videos I made, I didn't really answer any of the comments. And I just felt bad making more videos without going back to answer the comments.
Not obviously off topic from, Affording America, but how did you feel about China sucking up, all your data and basically creating their own personalized profile of you?
I have that is so, people freak out about that so much. I don't give a fuck.
Fair enough.
The thing is, people think that they're people when it comes to data. You're just a fucking number. That's it. At the end of the day, you're just a number. And if China's going to scan my face and put me in jail because I badmouthed them on TikTok 459 back in March of 2020, I don't see that as something that's super viable. I mean, maybe it is actually.
If you go to China, it's possible.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, they just released Brittany Griner today, and the United States traded her for the Lord of War. Which, if that's not a title alone, there was a movie
Called Lord of War,
which stars Nicolas Cage, and actually, it was one of his better movies.
It was a good movie, and yeah,
All
when you
these
think
movies
about
are
it,
great
it's not
movies. I don't
really
know
a
what you're
fair
talking
trade.
about. They're
Not
just
a fair trade.
So what Marmar says, you don't have to answer everybody. You post them for us to watch and hear the motivation. Thank you. But I still feel bad. And then Zupi said, high schoolers, 16, 17-year-old kids are supposed to work at McDonald's. And she said, who are supposed to work these jobs during the daytime if those jobs are only for school kids? And the answer to that is everybody who graduated high school at 18 years old and did nothing else.
So I guess my issue with your whole point about McDonald's low wages and everything is whether you finished high school or didn't, whether you went to college or didn't, if you're working a full-time job, you should be able to afford a basic standard of living.
Let me ask you this. When we define minimum wage, that language in itself has to imply that it is the base. Now, we have to find a job to correspond to the base level of wages. What job is that going to be? Is it going to be content moderator for Facebook and Twitter where you watch people getting their heads chopped off? Or is it going to be deep, dunking some chunks of French fries under some oil?
So
I imagine it's somewhere in there.
So
if anything, that the Facebook moderator gets more money.
right, but what I'm saying, first of all, when it comes like Marx's theory of wages is that you are not paid for the value you produce. You are paid based on how difficult it is to replace your labor.
Okay. So, can you repeat that one more time because I don't want it to be glossed over? The statement that you just made, and it's go ahead, just define it and say it one more time.
So Marx's theory of wages: workers are not paid based on the value that they produce for the company. They are paid based on the difficulty of the company to replace that labor.
So that's where I feel about McDonald's workers. I feel like you have a lot of people that will take that job, and it's not a complex task at hand.
So,
in fact, that's McDonald's business.
I think that that's one of the things that Marx got very right about wages. But my point is, from an ethical perspective, we should not have a system where somebody can work full-time hours and not be able to afford a basic standard of living. And by which I define as being able to afford rent and being able to afford food, clothing, and insurance. Like, I'm not talking about any luxuries whatsoever. I'm talking about the bare necessities to survive without suffering. And like our current minimum wage is $7.25 an hour.
In South Carolina.
Federal.
Yeah, that's federal.
Okay.
So states can have a higher minimum wage within the state. So like New York might have a higher one. I don't know. But
I think it's 15.
The federal minimum wage is $7.25. And
what's that math out to be for a year full time?
You
about 14.
You double it and then you multiply by 1,000.
It's about 14.5.
So yeah, so that's $15,000 for a year.
Let's call it
working
15,000.
Federal minimum wage. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think anybody pretends that you can survive on the minimum wage. I just don't think it's possible.
It's literally below the poverty line.
Guys, we're gonna drop off the feed in about 60 seconds. So just want to give you a heads up. We can continue the conversation. For those of you watching us,
I got about 5 to 10 minutes before I have to go.
All right. Those of you watching us on TikTok and Instagram, we're going to drop the feed in 60 seconds. Make sure you subscribe to SipTalk, the podcast, on any audio podcast platform and on YouTube. We'll see you guys next time. So I want you to finish your point there.
All right. So when I look at historical minimum wages and you adjust it for inflation, so the highest minimum wage I see was in 1970. Inflation adjusted was about $12 an hour. Now, remember that back in 1970, rents were proportionally lower, as we already talked about in the first couple minutes.
Yeah,
So
so
it was
that's
easier to live on
inflation.
$12 an hour.
Not for rent, yeah.
It was easier to live on $12 an hour in 1970 than it is in 2022. But my point is, I just think ethically, if you cannot survive working a full-time job, then on minimum wage, then the minimum wage is too low. And if you as a business cannot survive by paying your workers, like I'm going to call it the real minimum wage,
Mm-hmm.
if you as a business cannot survive by paying unless you're paying your workers below real minimum wage, then you have a flawed business model.
It means that your business does not provide that much value. That's ultimately what it means, because you're only able to survive by paying your workers a substandard wage.
Yeah, I didn't pay great wages in my company, but I really tried to. I gave people pay increases without them asking, based off my value to them. And
To be clear, you didn't pay at minimum wage or like minimum wage plus $1, right?
No, they were
So,
salary. There were salary positions that that I did my best to pay as high a salary as possible.
But it was probably like $17 to $20 an hour plus, right?
It was about 60 grand.
Okay, so that's 30 an hour.
Right, so that's not even close to minimum wage.
Yeah. Well, when we're talking about raising minimum wage, we're not talking about businesses like yours, which are paying employees currently $30 an hour. We're talking about.
I felt, from my perspective, that it was a rather low wage, given the office was in Midtown Manhattan, and the goal was to have these people on board in building a company where they could build themselves higher wages in the future. And we were very much having that trajectory. Like I said, I gave raises, pay increases, and bonuses. But then when we got really cut off at the knees during the pandemic, where we were forced to shut down, but then the landlord wanted every penny, and every company that we paid subscription services, et cetera, wanted every penny that they were owed. That put it slowed us down quite a bit.
I don't think anyone's criticizing you for having to downsize
I'm
the
just
pandemic. The point is, like,
if the people that get paid to listen to this podcast, I want them to understand that perspective.
But I guess for you to be paying somebody $60,000 a year and feeling that was a low wage, the criticisms that I'm lobbing out here are not directed at somebody like you, because even at like at the most charitable reading of your wages, you were paying double minimum wage.
Yeah.
Because the fight for 15 and everything like that. So you're paying double what people are asking for. My criticism is with these giant companies that are making a ton of money. And the only reason they're making such grandiose sums of money is because their workers in their job orientation are getting like pamphlets on how to apply for food stamps.
Well, yeah, that's
and why you should avoid any labor unions, because they'll cut into your wages.
But that's why I can hold on to my liberal roots in knowing that that's how I ran my business, and that there was times, the majority of the time, not the majority of the time, but there were times where I was paying people's salaries and putting my personal home rent and the office rent on credit cards. So, just to give some perspective into, I know, Kevin, you pointed your finger at me and said, I make all this money in Manhattan.
Well, again, as we were talking, I was being absurd to make my point. Again, my point is everyone's time has value. What, you may, let's say that your skill is, 90% of the value that you provide to your business, right?
Kevin, I got your point, and I understand you assigning a high value in my time was to incentivize me to work at Walmart behind a cash register. I understand that. I listened to your example.
I said I've been drinking the Snob Creek, so.
Okay, so
I think kind of to summarize, we have a couple different perspectives. I think the real hardcore left wing ultra liberal is we just increase wages. Okay, and I don't think we're all thinking that that's the only solution, but I think the hardcore left wing ultra liberal is increase wages, and kind of all this strife, all this discussion just kind of evaporates. But what I'm saying, and I'll give you guys each a chance before we wrap to kind of add your spin or your perspective on this. My thinking is that we've really fucked up in terms of outsourcing our labor, outsourcing all of our goods, creating subscription-based and rental-based economy that nobody's building any equity if you're just paying subscription and rental. And we're letting these big corporations dictate what's happening to the middle and the lower class, just because the middle and the lower class don't have a player in the game, right?
well, the big corporations can afford political influence,
but they're just they don't have any players in the game. They are just the terrain the game is played upon, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot that needs to be fixed, but I don't think fixing one thing really well is going to solve it. And I don't think we can fix anything really well at this point in time with a two-party system in a divided country, and a country that's so large that we have New York, New Jersey, California, Florida, Texas, and South Dakota all in the same country, that we're all going to come to an agreement anyways. So James, actually, Kevin, I want to hear your closing perspective. James, I'll give you the final words and then we'll sign off. Sound
Sure.
good?
I mean, I would say that it would be foolish for anyone to think that you can fix any given problem by just raising the wages. And I say that as, again, the resident hippie liberal douche. The issue, I think, more is within the political arena. People, on either side will focus on one issue. And this isn't specific to cost of living. This is specific to just anything going on in America, right? Take a look at the latest school shooting or whatever, and it's all, okay, well, the left wants to ban your guns and the right wants more guns everywhere or more police everywhere, right? When instead there's 20 or 30 different issues that you could talk about that contribute to gun violence. You could talk about this when it comes to abortions. You could talk about this to any number of issues, but within the political arena, it's always, let's focus on this one thing. Whereas realistically, what needs to be done is a more holistic approach needs to be taken and look at everything that's wrong within the system and apply solutions to all of them at once. Because if you just apply one single patch, it's going to, end badly at best.
All right, James, I think you're up, and you're welcome for getting the last word in. So go for it.
When it comes to general affordability in this country, the biggest issue is kind of the late stage capitalism aspect of our culture, where so much of the wealth is concentrated in so few people, and money buys power. And until you find a way of taxing that out and redistributing it to people that would be able to actually tangibly benefit from that money, you're going to continue to have these inequality problems. And when you have large corporations that are able to buy up a significant portion of the supply of housing and then rent it back to people at a price that would be more than the mortgage that they would have been able to qualify for, and when you have a business that's sustained only because you're paying sub-market wages, like we're an unsustainable path. And like the solution is either to fix it now by gently increasing taxes, and the higher up you are in income, the less gentle that increase is, or at some point this differential between rent and wage growth is going to get to a point where too many people can't afford it, can't afford to live in this country at all, and you either have a mass exodus or you have another civil war.
Yep, I think that was very well said, and I feel like that's the direction we're heading. You know, we talked about the 40-year trend of cost of living, and
Cost of living is outpacing wage growth. At some point, that gap is going to be too large, and enough people will be suffering that it will reach a critical mass, and something will explode. And so, like a nuclear reactor, you either pour some water on it and cool it off and keep it nominal, or if you ignore it long enough, you have a meltdown and you have a huge disaster.
all right, guys. Kevin, you're either texting James, you're researching something.
No, so there was a quote. No, there was a quote from Cutter earlier. Someone had asked him about one of the people running the World Cup about all the deaths in the creation of the stadiums and stuff. And his quote was basically, "People die every day. It's sometimes in work," and that's very much where we're heading. We're not there now, obviously. We're not in the state that Qatar is, but yeah, if we continue on this path of cost of living increasing and wages not, then we'll eventually reach that point.
Yeah, and you can see this throughout history, that when economic conditions in a country decline past a certain point, the end result is violent revolution. I'm not advocating for that. I would like to avoid that. But
we're seeing it. We're seeing it happen.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. On that note, I think this was an entirely unproductive conversation. I'm glad we had it.
We end every podcast that way.
I feel like everything we've talked about how to fix the United States, the last 4 episodes, including the 5th episode where we covered the midterm elections, were completely non-productive. And it sucks because it's not like we don't agree.
It's fatalistic, or just like saying like we have all these ideas and none of them are going to happen.
But a lot of them aren't great ideas, and the reason they're not just great ideas is because there's no possibility, there's no feasibility of that happening given our current state. Which to me means one thing: it means things have to get a lot worse for any change to happen, and that's unfortunate. But I just don't think that people are going to agree on shit until they have to.
I have to agree.
Will one side eventually come to the table with schmorschnaps?
I don't know. You said it.
That's a reference to South Park.
It sounded like schnapps. I'm not going to have any schnapps tonight. I'm going to pour one more glass of gin, put the bottle in its hiding place, and edit this podcast. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for watching on TikTok. I see a half dozen of you watching this live right now. And
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure you guys subscribe on all audio podcast platforms. Search SipTalk. And you can also follow us on YouTube. And if you watch YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch, you can watch us live. You can comment, ask your questions. We'll thank Jessica Majeski. I think I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong. James, some help on that?
Medetsky.
It's got to be Polish. We just saw her recent comment. She said disregard it, but calling her out anyways. We'll see you guys next time. Kevin, thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Adios.
Cheers.
Bye.
Well, that's the end of this episode. I want to thank you for joining. If you have not already, please subscribe on YouTube and all audio podcast platforms. And also, if you wouldn't mind, hit the like button. That way, at least I know you're there, especially if you already subscribe. See you guys next time.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.